When local police behave badly. This is ICAC Unpacked for the 20th day of October 2024. This story is a little dated, but hey, not as dated as my story or that of many others. It goes back to approximately mid 2021 uh, in terms of when it hit the media, but it goes back, I think, to about 2014. So it's about 10 years old, but it just sort of indicates the resolution, um, which came in 2023, sort of stimulates the imagination of what actually happens out there versus what the police tell you. Of course, when the police get to tell the story, their story is very different than what actually happens. And it's very interesting when the tables are turned on them. So as the story goes, and hang on for this one because if you haven't been following it, it's going to be a little confusing to you, and I'll do my best to straighten it out. I've actually met the detective in the middle of this, whom I did not know was involved in this until maybe 2 or 3 weeks later. I've reached out to him. He, of course, has not gotten back to me. But a Newsweek story, one of many in December of 2021, December 21st specifically, Virginia cops in Fairfax County, the same county that stung me, protected a sex trafficking ring in return for free sex from victims. And that's the lawsuit, colon lawsuit. This is by Yumi Davis. So that's the headline on it. Of course, this headline's a bit sensationalized. I will give that to the police because I'm honest about it, as opposed to what they do to the rest of us out here who are not cops. But basically, cops were tipped off that there was a trafficking ring being operated, and the trafficking ring had a Jane Doe, who's a 43-year-old female daily beast, I think. Um, Provides that information later on from Costa Rica, known as Jane Doe here to protect her identity, naming four officers, two, a lieutenant and a sergeant, who were actually on the rolls of the 10,000 who were regular visitors to this particular prostitute, as well as two others, a Edwin Rosler, the chief of police, and his assistant, a man whose name is trying to think where the name was exactly on here, James Baumstark, who is now a deputy chief in Asheville, North Carolina. Edwin Rosler, is retired, and I found no uh, address where he's located. The other two, who is, let's see, the lieutenant named Barbazetta, Barbazetto, and Michael Barbazet, excuse me, the police lieutenant, and Jason Mardoco, clients of the particular madam who had Jane Doe working for her. Okay, now that you know the players, apparently in right around 2014, this woman was recruited to come to the United States as Jane Doe. She worked with the alleged madam in the group as well, and I'll get to her name in a minute here, Hazel Sanchez Cerdas, who, according to Jane Doe, seized Jane Doe's passport and told her she was going to be working as a uh, high class call girl for wealthy clients. It turns out she ended up being a garden variety prostitute in the madam's employ. What makes this, of course, nasty and blew it up is the sensational allegation of Jane Doe that not only was the chief and his one of his principal deputies, but a lieutenant and a sergeant were also involved. Now, the lieutenant and the sergeant are interesting because around 2014, when the police were tipped off that this sex ring was going on, apparently there were double dealings going on in the police department. Some were enjoying the services of this madam, but one particular detective was assigned to take a closer look and investigate what was going on. His name is and was William Wolf. Bill Wolf was introduced to me as somebody who spoke at an event I was at as an anti trafficking expert, Anti Trafficking International group founder. He also works with the American First Foundation, which is, I think, filled with Trump's appointees and so forth, former Trump officials. And he, William Wolf, went against Danica Rome in Prince William County as the Republican um, um, nominee in the last cycle to challenge her for that Senate seat, or for yes, for her delegate seat, and then now she's in the Senate. He lost the election. I did get to chat with him, very personable. We exchanged information. I contacted him. He did not get back to me. Well, I found out only later this entire incident. I didn't pay much attention to it, but it bears repeating based on what actually happened at the end. So, this was December 21st, 2021. This had been going on for some time. A civil rights attorney for Jane Doe, whose name is one Glassberg, um, said that he was investigating this. He tried to get together with the county. The county said basically, I'm quoting him, pound sand. So he thought that he had a very good case. It went to the federal grand jury in Alexandria, and as the facts came out, Jane Doe apparently escaped from this group, but after serving the sex trafficking group run by this madam, um, apparently it wasn't quite a sex ring, but it was simply a simple madam who had sex workers working with her. And she escaped, though, somewhere between 2012 and 2015, reported to the FBI because she had been advised that Fairfax police were running this protection racket and were protecting one another, and hence the investigation. Curiously, uh, there's a bit more to the story. Victor Glassberg apparently was in one of these interviews said that one of his contacts, which is Bill Wolf, was threatened by not only ranking officers, but of course the lieutenant who was being serviced, if you will, by the Jane Doe, Michael Barr Bazette, who strangely started taking an interest in Detective Wolf's investigation around 2014. The obvious reason, of course, is he did not want his name exposed. He did not want the police department exposed. And eventually, Glassberg had to sue the county in order to get the names released of any police officers involved. The only two that actually came up were Sergeant Jason Mardocco and Mardocco or Docho, Mardocco, and Michael Barr Bazette, the lieutenant who was Mardocco's supervisor. In any event, those two resigned when excuse me, when defense attorney Glassberg was able to get their information and from court order, because of course the police were never going to cooperate with that, and they promptly resigned. Um, in let's see, in I think that basically covered it. In May 12th, 2022, you had an NBC4 investigation in which the two officers, that would be Bar Bazette and Mardocco, asked the court to toss out um, their convictions or their indictments, and the court refused. So, interestingly enough, the Daily Beast reports that Wolf had a very contentious relationship with the department. I'm reading here, Wolf was the only one assigned, get this, to the human trafficking unit. He was the only one assigned, despite the fact that they had recently gotten in somewhere around 2014 a $500,000 grant to stop human trafficking. So get this. On the one hand, the police department got this big grant that they were supposed to put resources into. They assigned one officer. This one officer accidentally stumbles upon the one thing they didn't want exposed, officers using the service of this woman whom they were supposed to be protecting. and preventing from getting into the same sort of sex trafficking operation that they were trying to protect, but were not, but instead being serviced by. Okay? And this detective was approached by the lieutenant, and the lieutenant said, "Listen, I don't want to hear a word about anything having to do with human sex trafficking coming out of your mouth. Shut up." Later on, Wolf, according to Glassberg, if I have it right, in the story, testified that he was told he was called by Rosler, who refused to identify himself, but asked him if he intended, quote, to play ball. And Detective Wolf said he did. Detective Wolf subsequently resigned several years later in 2017 and started his Anti Trafficking International. There's some evidence that he actually was running that concurrently with his job. I'm not sure exactly where the dates are, but that's a curiosity in and of itself, uh, perhaps suggesting conflict of interest. I don't know. But what's interesting here, too, is that when it finally went to trial in January 2023, Rosler and Bao Stark, the deputy to Rosler, the chief, were exonerated, and the young woman who was Jane Doe was actually attacked, and surfaced were text messages between her and Cardos, the madam, suggesting that they were discussing prices and such, and the as the Jane Doe kept coming back and providing services for clients, apparently willingly, they suggested the jury did that there was no case here and it was dismissed. That, of course, is not the end to it. Of course, the woman, the Jane Doe, said, "Look, I was threatened. My passport was taken. They threatened to tell my family. I didn't want to be humiliated. And the man I married was involved in it to the degree that he continued to force me to service clients and get that revenue from them." So the jury, in any event, did not believe her. However, Cardos, the madam, Hazel Cardos, did go to prison. She was sentenced to 2.5 years in prison. The two officers, Barzette and I keep forgetting his name here, Mardoko, resigned from the force. Apparently, they were not charged. Apparently, if you're police officers and you violate your oath and have sex with prostitutes who are being trafficked, you get away with it. I'm not sure what they did with the 10,000 others on the madam's list in her phone directory, but I don't see anywhere where the detectives were punished at all. And the only one who's a real victim is the woman who was Jane Doe, the Costa Rican woman. What was interesting too is in Wolf's testimony, Bill Wolf apparently told um, the defense, at least, that not only was he threatened, but he was told by fellow officers that, jokingly, any number of times, that human trafficking victims were not really victims. After all, they, if you'll forgive me, put out for the officers and stuff. They weren't real victims, and that he was behaving more like a social worker than an officer. In other words, you go along to get along and you cover up for one another. The long, sad, pathetic, dirty history of cops protecting one another along the way, which is really what this story is about overall, though it's a bit dated by a little over a year and such. So I thought I would point that out for those of you out there who are seeing the boys in blue as these pristine, shining lights upon a hill, which we can all certainly use as our moral beacons. It's important to understand that they're very often much, much worse. And don't forget the $500 million that they had in this human trafficking, which they say is very, very important. Uh, they assigned Wolf to go to child porn instead and to investigate that and to leave the adult human trafficking stuff alone. So it just goes to show you that they're happy to play games with these situations and with people's lives when it's convenient for them to do so. And, Fairfax Police has long, sad history of this, and they're not alone. I want to make sure that I do my due diligence, so and say that not every police officer is bad, just like not every teacher is, just like this teacher wasn't. But since they don't really cut anybody else any slack, I think it's important to see the other side of it. It's important to see that police very often create the mistrust, the distrust, the anger and resentment that they then turn around and sideline while they ask the public's help to solve crimes and such. Well, this is the 20th day of October 2024. I am ICAC, Unpacked, and Norman Michaelation. Have a good day.